Welcome to the second half of our presentation today. My name is Michelle Curry, and I have the dual pleasure of being a Newark Civic Trustee for the last 7 or so years, because I refuse to quit, and also the Chief Facilitator of Civic Trust for the Citizens Campaign. I have sitting here with me 2 of my co-trustees, one from Perth Amboy and one from Trenton, that have successfully used the 10-step no-blame problem-solving method to make positive and impactful change in the communities that we all live, work, and play in. So first, I'm going to start with Samantha, ladies first. And Samantha will be able to tell you what she was able to accomplish once she was aware of how to apply the no-blame problem-solving process.
Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Castro. I do want to start off with saying that every time I have to speak publicly, I get this weird feeling of nervousness, anxiety, because there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with a platform. But at the same time, I feel like today's theme that we've been hearing routinely is acts of selflessness. And I think it's a good reminder that whenever you are civically engaged, it's with the idea that it is somewhat selfless and that you're working for the greater good as opposed to your own self-interest or to inflate your own ego. So, you know, I guess it's kind of good that I'm nervous. I guess it's kind of not. But we'll just start on from here. So I'm 24 years old. I just turned 24. And I think a few years ago, I would have described myself as tired. And I definitely say that today I'm highly motivated and thankfully, because of the citizen service, empowered. I guess my journey with social activism started when I was born because, you know, I'm Afro-Latina and I'm Muslim. And, you know, you're kind of spending your whole existence advocating for yourself and for the people in your community. Mm-hmm. But I would say that it took a more serious and productive turn following the unfortunate murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I had just moved back to New Jersey, and my friends had texted me, and they were like, Samantha, we have to do something. George Floyd was murdered, and everyone's protesting. And I was like, okay, then, like, protest. And they were like, okay, but how do we do it? And I was like, I don't know. And so I contacted my local NAACP, and within a week, I arranged a protest. And that protest was in Perth Amboy, and it had over 1,000 participants. And it was widely successful. But everyone kept telling me, okay, Samantha, so you got the gas in the car, where are you going? And I was like, what do you mean, where am I going? And they were like, you don't just protest and call it a day. You have to figure out what it is that you're trying to do. What do you want to do with this traction that you gained? And so, of course, I went to my mayor, and I was like, I have 17 demands. And she was like, 17? And I was like, yeah. And luckily enough, I got into correspondence with the Citizen Service, and the first thing they told me was do the doable. That's it. And obviously, you could spend your whole life trying for those 17 demands and only reach 5 of them. And so I decided to focus on de-escalation training and public safety within my hometown, because I felt that that was what was lacking when it came to George Floyd's death, when it came to Breonna Taylor's death. There was no instance of de-escalation. There was no instance of hesitation. Mm-hmm. And so after that, I started attending city council meetings. And that's where I advocated for the adoption of an ordinance, which would encourage a guardian culture with our police department as opposed to a warrior culture, where we encourage a sense of community as opposed to a sense of us versus them. Mm. And when I went to these meetings, I made sure I came with evidence, because it's very easy to point fingers and to place blame, but when you come from a place of, okay, we all know what the problem is, but I want to talk about the solution, it's pretty easy to get heard. It's pretty easy for people to give you undivided attention. And so one of the pieces of evidence I proposed was the national average for force training is 8 hours, as compared to the de-escalation training, which is only 1 hour. So that's an 8-to-1 ratio, and I didn't feel like that was correct. I didn't feel like that was safe, especially in my community where we're predominantly a black and brown community. It just didn't feel like a safe environment for any of us. And so I would say after about 1.5 years, maybe 2, my ordinance was adopted. And this ordinance called for a promotion policy that was linked to increased de-escalation training and an annual audit on the use of force that was going to be monitored by a Citizens Public Safety Advisory Board. And that was a great achievement. I was very proud. Thank you. And so the board is alive and well, and thankfully and gratefully, I was elected by my board members as chair of that board. And so, yeah, it was definitely a shift from, I don't want to say I lost passion. I definitely think I gained perspective. I definitely gained an understanding that emotions are great, and they drive us to incredible places, and they're the first things that bring us to the doorstep of change, right? But it comes to a point where you can get blinded by your own emotions, by your own ambitions. And thankfully, with the citizen service, I was able to use evidence. I was able to use the no-blame approach to get sustainable change, and I hope to keep using those tools in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. I have to say that you remind me of a quote from Dr. William Bennett. And the quote is that without participation, there is no representation. So thank you for understanding that this is not a dress rehearsal. This is live. So next we have Darren Freedom Green, who is one of our Trenton trustees, and I will let Darren explain to you how he has been able to use this method of no-blame problem solving to create something that Trenton and many, many, many other cities in this nation desperately need. Darren?
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Need to make sure you're with me in here. First things first, I want us to take a moment of silence for the 5 lives lost in Virginia today. Thank you. We often talk about the extremism that we're facing when we enter spaces and places. But when lives are taken and no one says a word, no one acknowledges that, we participate in perpetuating the reality we say we're fighting against. So I want to always be cognizant of the human condition because the decisions we make shape and mold it. Part of our work, I think, when we talk about civic education, civic performance, starts with us returning to reinstilling humanity. And it's very important that we do so because what we don't realize is if within the circumference of our humanity is our sanity. And when people have lost either or, that's the battle we first fight when we walk into rooms trying to dialogue about curriculum and civics and education and all of that. My second piece is the mantra was put up on the screen, a path to healing one's democracy. So from an independent perspective, I was always trained and taught by 2 great shepherds, one Pastor Woodson and the other Pastor Soaries. When something is broken, we have to ask ourselves, what did we do in the process of breaking it? So if the democracy is broken and healing is needed, you have to ask yourself first and foremost, what are you going to do? So we come in these rooms and part of our failure is our thought process. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, but before the Word was a thought. And when I listen to how we think in these rooms, it's often broken. We speak as Baldwin spoke when we said the victim who's able to articulate a situation moves from being a victim to being a threat. And I think part of our problem is we operate that space of being a victim too long. We come in rooms and talk about what we don't have, who we're up against. Man, my green-eyed jewel, my mother said, if God be with us, who can be against us? So when I come into any space, I expect to speak well, I expect to dominate, I expect to educate, I expect to empower. In the city of Trenton, it is right now a walking nightmare. I won't cut any words about it. We're trying to move to a place of reform and better. But one of the things we were able to work with the George Floyd movement was to put auxiliary police in place. And the reason we were able to do that is because Harry and I and members of the board sat together with, I want to say, 4 police directors. And we kept laying out all the intricacies of why this piece was so important, why we need to put something together to be able to deal with what's going on. Most of the issues with law enforcement, nobody wants to talk about it, they're social service issues. And a lot of what they run into, they really shouldn't. Those officers are designed to protect and serve. They have no idea on how to deal with domestic violence, the mental health, and all the issues that often happen in urban environments. So when you talk about auxiliary police, you're now talking about a body of individuals who are sent forth to do police training at the academy, everything except the gun. And they begin to be a part of the policing, which is not just a structural reality, but a mindset. And who better to police or secure the community than people who are of, for, and about that? People who can walk into arenas where fights and escalation happen sometimes and be able to talk and dialogue and deal with people before we start talking about punitive measures. So again, when we started to put this on the ground and talking about the auxiliary police, we presented it to a number of police directors. And of course, we were rejected because they thought that we were trying to come in and take their space, take their place. But as they began to see that, one, Harry and I weren't going nowhere, and Pastor Sawyers is exactly right. If you don't answer the phone, Harry will be calling back to let you know that he's not going anywhere. But that's one of the things I love about him. And he's one of the people who we really should embody, because if you're going to be great, and that needs to be the standard, you've got to be committed. And if you're going to be committed, you have to have a deeply rooted conviction. Mm-hmm. And Harry's a living embodiment of that. And again, that's part of why we do this work. But as we began to assemble, we had what was called the solution-based forum. And we brought together the mayor, other elected officials, law enforcement officials, but we also brought in, so they can see, the Plainfield Auxiliary Police. And they saw the uniforms, they saw the pageantry, they saw the importance of people who were of, for, and about the community being a part of the policing reality. And then they started to study the numbers, and they started to study the impact and how, as a part of that system which exists, they were the practical component that could resolve a lot of the issues in the urban environment. And again, I come from the city of Trenton, New Jersey. Within the last 2 years, we've had 90 homicides. That's real. So when you talk about a necessary or component to be able to engage people where they are and be able to change the dynamic in the relationship of policing and law enforcement, this is what we were able to do. Now, during this process, one of the police directors, when a situation happened in the streets, he actually used the terminology of hood rat. And that was his thought process. And I really should have started this saying, I was one of the most toxic people before I met Citizens Campaign. I literally used to come into rooms and look to be disruptive because I was the young black man full of anger, full of trauma, full of pain, frustrated. And what I did not know was there was a mechanism and a path to bring resolution to the issues I was being plagued by. And once I was able to engage Citizens Campaign, Civic Trust, and the curriculum that comes with both, I learned that if I came into a room and did not speak but listened to others, found common ground that we all can work on, then we could resolve issues that were plaguing all of us. And one of the things people were very upbeat about was having the capacity to go from not knowing to knowing. And it's very simple because the programs, the videos lay it out for you. And instead of walking into a room and hoping and wishing, and I won't be disrespectful in saying praying, but actually learning the science of how problems are resolved, we were able to do that. And again, in that format, those elected officials, the mayor, and even the law enforcement officials embraced what we were doing. So again, we were able to put auxiliary police in place, and it was a powerful component in terms of where we are now. And what I think, a last piece I'll touch on, is what I think it does most importantly is it allows us to be able to recruit. You often hear across this country, Chicago, Trenton, New York, Philly, that the police force should look like the people of the community. But that's very difficult to do. I teach 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, and they are innately taught to hate law enforcement, not because they know law enforcement, but unfortunately they experience or watch law enforcement lock up a lot of their peers, family members, and friends in their communities. Now, there are other areas and things we could talk about with that, but to see that makes them innately hate law enforcement. So when we start talking about auxiliary and those being people who are of, from, and for the community, they become a great recruit mechanism to dialogue and say, well, you know what, security isn't bad. You know what, law enforcement isn't bad. And what I teach in the schools when I bring them in there is I say, if you don't like how the officer talks to you, become one. If you don't like how the officers walk, talk, and move in your community, become one. Because if we don't stop allowing our young people to come up with all that anger and frustration and not move that energy into being resolution and being active agents of change, then we again will have failed not only ourselves, but them as well. So again, part of the work that we're doing with Citizens Campaign is not just talking about what needs to happen, but we're making it happen. And I think all of us in this room need to actively engage and participate, write the check, because it's not just about this, what we're doing. This is a movement. And I would say to all of you, as I look you dead in the eyes, 50 years from now, they're going to ask us, what did we do? Mm-hmm. Did we stay on social media talking about what could have been done? Mm-hmm. Or did we literally and figuratively get in rooms like this, leave out and become ambassadors of civic greatness and transform and change the communities we walk, talk, and live in? Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. And to paraphrase James Baldwin, which is what you remind me of this, not everything we face can be changed,
Right.
but nothing can be changed
Unless it's faced.
until we face it. I mean, it seems so simplistic, but that's what the two of you did, along with the rest of us, civic trustees, and those of us that fight this fight every day for our young ones from K to 12, for our college students, for our adults, for our seniors, to make sure that we are all represented, and for each one of us to understand that our voice has value.
Right.
And that value is the difference that we bring to the table. And that table cannot serve a full meal unless all of the ingredients are there.
No doubt.
And each one of us is an ingredient. And I think that with the Citizens Campaign, we have all been able to take a structure and fine-tune what we've all wanted to do, but it's given us a cleaner vehicle to drive in. So for me, when my kids were young, I wanted them to understand that every action they do has a consequence and has a response, and that their actions will trickle and impact people that they will never, ever meet in their lifetime. But yet, they have to be responsible human beings.
Right.
Because that's the only way this works. And I, too, thank Harry for giving us that structure, for allowing us to be who we are and to grow together. Because otherwise, I wouldn't know any of these great people in this room,
right,
and the other great people that I've crossed paths with. Thanks goodness to this journey. So I'm going to open questions up to the floor. And as I've said before to my students, that means that you all get to talk now. So does anyone have any questions for Sam, for Darren, for myself, for any of us? Let's open the floor and have a party. Not all at once, though. Okay, so I'll throw the first question out. Oh, we have a question. Okay, we have one over here, and we have one over here. Okay, there we go.
Well, Darren spoke very powerfully about persuading the police that it was actually in their advantage to embrace reforms. And if that's something that can be done in more places, it's obviously tremendously valuable. So I wanted to ask Sam, with the de-escalation effort, how did you work with the police And could you succeed in getting buy-in there? I know it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, of course. So initially, when we first drafted the ordinance, we were involved with police unions and intimately involved in what they believed was the correct terminology. And I think the greatest worry that officers had was that we would be overstepping a boundary where we would at some point possibly jeopardize their job, jeopardize their social security and stuff like that, jeopardize their positioning in our community. And so it took a long time, but with open dialogue, with honest dialogue, I was able to secure trust and secure friendship, honestly. And I can genuinely say that before I got involved with this, I was deathly afraid of police officers, like incredibly so. And it's given me the opportunity, thankfully, to see these officers, how obvious it may be, see them as human beings and see them as people that, clock in and out just like anybody else. Within my board, we have 2 de facto members that are police officers. So whenever we have a meeting, I have 2 officers there, a captain and a detective, that help me understand the nuances of the police department, of training, of certain laws that have been passed, what's okay within our town, what isn't okay, what would be beneficial, what wouldn't be beneficial. So I have been able, thankfully, like Darren, to form a relationship with our local police, but it definitely took honesty, it took no blame, it took transparency to get there.
Absolutely.
If I can add to that, in the city of Philadelphia, I think a few months ago there was a shootout on one of the main strips, the business strips. I was up there probably about an hour before that occurred. One of the things I did subsequently in the meeting with police officers was talk about the environment we live in. We tragically have a generation, not all of them, but a lot of them, who are numb to the reality they exist in. Officers are well aware of what they're up against. When they did that shootout that hit about 10 people, if you know Philadelphia, if you know the South Street, there are officers almost on every other block. So when that fight escalated into a gunfight, they saw the police, they saw the officers there, but they did not care. So when we have conversations like this, we have to boldly say to officers, we want you to make it home to your families. These tools that we're presenting with Citizens Campaign, Civic Trust, these are individuals who are working with you to create a safer environment for you. And when they move from the adversarial role of thinking you're trying to take their power or move them out or come in and take their overtime, we're not here for any of that. Auxiliary police actually don't even get paid. They receive a stipend in the end of the year, and that is part of the process of, again, what Harry itemized with dealing with local budgets. Again, we're working and doing the doable, but my point is the police and the community know what's out there, and we have to present solutions to resolve the issues we're all dealing with. When that occurred, I was bothered by it because I had kids with me, and if I'd have been there a few minutes later, they might have got hit. So when I talk to the community, when I talk to the young people, when I talk to police officers, I talk from a solution-based space, but I incorporate them into the equation so they don't feel like I'm talking at them, but I'm talking with them.
Absolutely. We have a question. We had a question over in this area, in the back.
Yeah, I think you answered it, but just to follow up, I live in the city, I live all over New York, but I know Philadelphia well.
Yes, sir.
So what in the city, those of us who live here know that, like most places, we're trying to find a pathway to marry increased public safety with increased justice reform, criminal justice reform.
Right.
And a lot of people want to make it a binary. It's either or. Yeah. So could you speak more to how we get across that bridge or create a bridge to...
I think when you begin to talk about, most times you only hear the frame community policing when it's election cycles, right? So it's, again, a term and phrase used to make you feel like we're moving towards something. But I think when I talk politics, when I talk civics, I tell them it's like faith, it's eternal, which means you ought to get up every day with it, you ought to lay down thinking about it. We have relegated ourselves to thinking about civic duty, civic responsibility, civic education, to election cycles. And we have all kinds of creative questions once people are running for office, and the moment they get elected, we go back to sleep. So like now, we just had a major election. We're headed towards another runoff. But our dialogues and our conversations have to continue because the issues aren't going anywhere. And that has to happen from people like us in this room. If you sit and wait for people with titles to sit and make decisions to change your conditions, you will wait forever. It must be us having the dialogue, having the conversation about bridging that gap, about building relationships, as Sam said, talking to officers, talking to police directors about where we need to go and how we're going to get there. A big piece now is social justice reform. So it's a great opportunity to come in the room with those foundations, that kind of conversation and dialogue, especially in particularly black and brown communities, because you have a large amount of people who have, unfortunately, the title of ex-offender on their name. So when you start having dialogue with them, you're not only reintroducing them back into society, but you're again dealing with the fear officers often have of them. So to answer the question, it's a continuous dialogue filled with solutions, not hypotheses, and that's the one thing I love about Citizens Campaign. We have a law and policy crew that actually tells you before you go have a discussion what you can and can't do, what laws are on the book. So again, when you enter into a room, do your due diligence and come in with solutions. So when you dialogue with elected officials, they are overwhelmed with complaints, issues, and concerns. And if you can come to the table with solutions, they're going to sign off and move the thing forward.
And just to add on to what Darren was saying, I also believe that it is imperative that we use verbiage
right.
that translates to those people that we're discussing.
Right.
So if we walk around saying restorative justice to the community, they're like, no idea what that is.
Right.
What is that? And then when we start asking questions, we get 9 different definitions of what it is. So again, transparency is very important, but the ability to translate from those of us that are up here trying to make things happen to those that we're trying to make it happen for.
No doubt.
So they understand what is going on, what the expectations of them are, right? And what their responsibilities and roles are in that, and how they too can participate and empower themselves in order to move forward. So definitely understanding what we're talking about is priority. And I think if we can get past that barrier, then the concept of them existing in a marriage is a no-brainer. I think we'll be able to do that.
No doubt.
I think also in addition, I think we need to stop being so hesitant when it comes to grabbing what you want. If we want restorative justice, you go and get it.
Right.
And you don't wait for someone else to pick up the reins and do it for you.
No doubt.
I'm talking from a place where many of my friends, unfortunately, are in circumstances where they do have that title of ex-con, ex-felon, ex-whatever. And, it has to come from a place of self-responsibility. It has to come from a place of humanity where, you can no longer tolerate these things. To quote the great Angela Davis, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing things I can no longer accept.
Right.
And, it comes to a point where you have to put your foot down and you use the skills that you have, and you also look to places where you can garner more skill and garner more education, more... you have to be willing to do what needs to get done and get your hands dirty.
That's right.
And it's beyond just, sitting in a fancy hall and talking and eating hors d'oeuvres. It's about, not to call you guys out, but it's more than voting. It's more than having little fancy little talks.
That's right.
It's about getting in there and
doing the work.
Yeah, getting gritty.
Doing the doable.
Yeah.
Doing the doable. We're a society that follows.
Yes.
For the good or the bad of it.
Right.
That's a whole nother panel discussion. Right. But if we see that people are moving forward in a battle, we jump in.
Right.
We jump in. So it really just takes us to start. If we start pushing the car down the hill,
right,
it will roll and it will pick up speed.
No,
and we will get to where we need to get to. And this society will be the better for it. But not just the society. we will be better forward.
No doubt.
Right? Because it'll make us better people. And the stronger we are as individuals, the more awesome we are as a team.
No doubt.
So, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I'm curious, as you've been very focused on police reform and developing those relationships, what other areas have been brought to light that need to be fixed, that these relationships with law enforcement and those agencies kind of bring out, and have you dealt in them?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Two immediately come to mind. Definitely schooling, public schooling without a doubt. Especially for Black and brown children. The fact that so many of us are not aware of our own history, aren't aware of our own greatness, aren't aware of all the things that we have achieved and continue to achieve every day, that's incredible to me. You know, it's so easy to open a book and see yourself. You know what I mean? See someone like you, see someone that has the same motivations and passions as you do. But unfortunately, I feel that the public school education system is definitely lacking, especially in the history department. We love to, you know, people say often history is written by the winners, you know, and so much of the truth, so much of what's occurred, so many of the emotions and the movements that have happened are, you know, just erased from our common knowledge. And I think, for one, we definitely have to look into education, public school education, and then secondly, the medical field. The racism within the medical field is ridiculous, and a lot of times it's the second step that people have to face when confronted with police, if there's a mental health crisis or if there's a domestic violence crisis, if someone's sexually assaulted. And a lot of times people, unfortunately, are re-traumatized when they enter that medical space, and I definitely think that's also an area that we need improvement in. Not just, of course, not just for Black and brown and indigenous folks, but also for the entire community. When one group is marginalized, when one group is oppressed, we're all oppressed.
Thank you, Samantha.
Oh, no problem.
So, we have the last question back here.
Well, you guys have done an extraordinary job. I'd like to suggest, if you haven't done it already, my name is Ibrahim Sharif. Take a look at the training academy of what police officers are trained to do.
Right.
I get tired of looking at corporate media, so I turn on Andy Griffin's show and the Lone Ranger.
Right.
And he said something like this: a bullet does not determine your life or death. You have to go through the courts. These guys are trained when they do their skills in firearms. They shoot at a silhouette.
Yeah.
And you see how they group the bullets. And I'm kind of being facetious, but the Lone Ranger, he shoots you in the shoulder or your leg.
Right.
So we have to look at the psychology and the mythologies in the police academy. That we must do, because the way they are programmed and trained, they take it to the streets.
No doubt.
And lastly, several of them said to me, I'd rather not be part of 6 people carrying me.
Right.
So we have to, and the other thing is, life has no color.
Right.
We have to stop using color scenarios like the media does. George Floyd, I personally am against Black Lives Matter unless you say all lives matter. We know what the deal is,
Right.
but let's not play media politics to separating us by color. Thank you.
Did you have a question? And in the blue, did you have a question?
Well, my question was more in line to how have you been able to build your movement beyond the initial folks engaged? Is there a strategy behind it? How do you do it?
So
All right. Go ahead, sir.
So initially, when it came to the protests, I just made a group chat with all my friends, and I was like, guys, you're doing this now. And everybody was like, okay. And then it was very apparent that after, the whole, I guess, social media craze that was activism for a couple months that summer, once that died down, everyone was like, okay, back to normal. And so it was very apparent that it's very difficult to keep, at least for my generation, to keep them engaged. We grew up with the internet, we grew up with social media, so unfortunately for my generation, we lose interest way too quickly. But what I do and what I strive to do is I try to educate. It's easy to tell somebody, like, come to this meeting, come to that, but when you start giving people examples throughout history that continuously happen over and over and over again, and you become aware of the cycle that we're stuck in because we haven't learned from our history, because we haven't made the structural changes that are necessary, people have no choice but to join you, to join the movement for change, for solid change, for change that's gonna last for the next 50 years, not just something that's gonna be cool for the next couple months and then call it a day. So I think education, that's my strategy, at least. I try to give as many resources as I can, such as a citizen service. I try to give anecdotal evidence. I try to give historical evidence, and it's been pretty helpful thus far.
No doubt. I'll keep it simple because we're short on time. I get off social media and engage. I get out and talk to people, churches, schools, community groups. People are always meeting. But tragically, we have a euphoria with talking about all the bad stuff, right? Yes. And we seem to stay there. Nobody talks about the practical reality of strategic action to move us forward. So I dialogue with people. We got to get back to talking to people. You can literally be at a dinner table and everybody's looking at their phone. So we've lost the art of the human touch and talking to people. So because I'm a public speaker, I get out and speak to people. And I use, for an example, our amazing ancestors for 381 days in Montgomery shut down a busing system. And they didn't have social media, they didn't have Twitter, they didn't have any of that. They talked to each other, they met, they discussed, they worked, and they educated each other by dialoguing. But the biggest part of dialogue is closing your mouth sometimes and listening to the other side. So you can hear where they are and find common ground to move forward. But I think what is amazing about Citizens Campaign, Citizens Trust, is it gives you a blueprint to move forward. It leaves no gray area because in the gray area we die.
Well, okay. There's nothing to say to top that one, Darren. Thank you, because that is exactly it. So I'm going to bring Mr. Harry Pozicki back up so that we can go through our closing. And again, thank you, everyone, for your time and your attention. We really, really appreciate it, and we definitely need it.
Thank you all for coming. Just remember one thing, a call to service is nothing if it's not answered.
That's right.
Enjoy the evening, enjoy each other.